When talking about self-improvement advice, reading books gets constantly brought up, but watching movies rarely ever does, and I have no idea why not. I would argue that watching movies has had a similar, if not sometimes better effect on my brain than reading ever has, and watching movies alters your brain in ways that you probably wouldn't even realize. Let me explain. When we watch a movie, we're transported into a character's world for the first time, and the first 10 or 15 minutes is vital for us to absorb as many clues about the character, the location, the plot, and so on. So how does watching movies actually affect your brain? When watching movies, we use the occipital and temporal lobes, which are responsible for visual perception and processing auditory information. We also use the Wernicke's area for speech comprehension. While this is fairly standard, what's really interesting about watching movies is that many different parts of our brain are activated while watching movies, and consequently, movies imitate our consciousness. When movies imitate our consciousness, it deeply influences us in ways that we wouldn't expect. When we watch compelling movies, our brains release oxytocin, which can enhance emotional responses. If you've ever cried while watching a movie, it's a good sign that your brain has released oxytocin due to that connection or that emotion you feel for the characters or the plotline. When we watch sad films, our brain can release endorphins, better known as natural painkillers, to help relieve pain and reduce stress. When watching scary or horror movies, our brain can go into fight or flight mode and release cortisol and adrenaline, where our sight and other senses become heightened. The brain abstracts coherent narratives from still images and sound, which sets us free to transcend the rat race of survival, even if for the briefest moment. The study shows the truth of the words, cinema is the most beautiful fraud in the world. You're probably wondering why does this even matter? Movies have so many psychological benefits and are just really important for society. They can improve and boost our mental health and well-being. They can help us relax after a long day of work and transport us into this imaginary world, even just for a couple of hours. Movies can increase our motivation to become the best versions of ourselves and even inspire reflection on the past. They allow us to recall simple times in our youth and show us that life is ultimately beautiful. Regardless of what you think, movies allow us to enjoy art, and it's really cool to watch a good movie where you just know that all of the different departments have excelled and combined together to create a fantastic movie. Movies can teach us a huge range of important things. First, it teaches us to empathize with characters, and it does so by putting the audience in the characters' shoes to understand their thoughts, their feelings, and their perspective on life. There have been many times where I've watched movies not really understanding the scope of certain struggles, but I've watched the movie and I've exited it and gained a whole new perspective of that issue, that time frame, or just a certain character's life. Movies can teach us about never giving up and chasing a better life no matter how hard it gets. Movies can teach us about loss and what it means to grieve a person who's no longer there. Movies can teach us to make the most of life and remind us that we've only got one shot at this thing. There are countless other things we can learn from watching movies, like facing our fears, never stop learning, standing up for what we believe in, being kind, not taking life too seriously, and the list just goes on and on. I really don't like when gurus force this narrative of never watching movies or TV shows because they're a waste of time and not productive, when in reality, there's countless things you can learn from movies and cinema that you just wouldn't learn from reading a book, and vice versa. I feel like when you watch movies that have a real soul put into it, you can feel it as a viewer, and it can change your perspective or outlook on things. I remember when I watched Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, and I don't think I've ever sobbed so hard from a movie in my life, and it's because it was a movie that was really relevant to a situation I've gone through in the past. But you might watch that movie and think, oh, it's a good movie, but not react in any way similar. And I think that's what's so cool about movies, is that everyone has different preferences, and everyone views movies differently regarding the different circumstances that they're currently dealing with in life. There might be a heartbreaking scene that takes you back to many years ago, or a happy scene that reminds you of childhood. And I think that's what's so cool about movies. For the 2 hours you're watching, you're fixated on the world and all of the characters in it. You smile, laugh, get scared and frightened. You empathize with characters and sometimes cry. and I seriously think that's the coolest thing ever. Let's just finish this off by saying, like, I'm not a cinephile. Like, I love movies, but I'm not gonna nitpick apart like an entire movie. Like, I like bad movies sometimes, and that's okay, but anyways.
The only thing I do know is that we have to be kind. Please, be kind. Especially when we don't know what's going on.